Hey there, human beings! Welcome to a new episode of GattoCast. This time with my friends Alex Solki from the Hebrew Hammercast, whatever it's called.
Whatever the hell you call it.
I don't know. You know what the name of your podcast. You should at least
Right,
know
exactly. Yeah, it is
what's
the
your podcast
Hammercast.
called.
I wasn't going to correct you if you got it wrong. I was just going to maybe change my name to like the Hammercast, but you got it. So we're good to go.
Okay. So we got a nice another live rant about the topic that no one is talking about in these days. It's something completely uncommon, and no one is really mentioning.
Very obscure topic indeed.
It's really out of fashion. So I'm sorry to deal with these out of fashion topics with. But that's why I invited a friend. At least I know I would have someone. We have someone to talk to.
Exactly. By the way, I got to compliment you on that opening thing with the picture with you with that toy gun. If you come to America, we'll get you a real one so that you can can take a picture with an actual. We'll make it an AR-15 because people aren't talking about those either. So that'd be perfect.
It would be. I could become a real American. I mean, I'm not sure I want to do that, but thanks for the offer.
You're very welcome. The offer remains open. It remains open.
I'm not sure it's open right now, but as soon as they open again, then I might think about it.
Right. My offer is open. I don't know. I can't speak about America's borders. I suppose if you're coming from the South, that might be a different story. But if you're going to fly in anywhere else, it may not work.
All right. Well, let's see what comes out. Anyway, definitely. Alex, so tell us something about you for, I don't know, this maybe some people who do not know who you are.
There may be some, ignorant folks out there we need to
there are, for sure, yeah.
By the way, Bunzum says AR-15 will be perfect for Mr. Gatto. So we've already got one vote for my idea. So I'm just saying there'll be plenty more that we'll be getting good votes on. All right, well, I have known Eduardo for a good number of years. He and I met in Jerusalem. And whenever I'm in America, I always tell people I mean the original Jerusalem, because there are a bunch of like small, crappy towns like littered throughout this country called Jerusalem. But I mean actually Jerusalem, Israel. And he was doing postdoctoral research in astrophysics there. And I was just living there and working as a personal trainer, helping people crush weakness all the live long day. And as luck would have it, he and I have a mutual friend, Mr. Lee Gansman. And I was training Lee, and you were taking Arabic lessons from Lee. And I was at the time learning Italian. And so he said, I have a student who is from Italy, and he wants to learn Hebrew. So maybe you can make arrangements, meet, hang out. And so we did that. We found out that we both had a very similar sense of humor, very similar outlook on life, an enjoyment of languages, and particularly the swear words. And
sure, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about.
Let's say this is the official debut. I'm just telling you, this is going to surprise you about Eduardo, that he finds these things very funny, as do I. In fact, that has not changed in the last 6 years. But kept in touch, maintained good contact, and even got to hang out in Italy, of all places. Italy and Germany. And Pennsylvania, that's right. Over the past few years since I moved back to the States, it's been Pennsylvania, Italy, Germany, and who knows? Maybe we'll add some other locale.
If we manage to survive this madness, because that's what we're going to talk about tonight, and that's what we've been living, I guess, on. I'm not sure about actually your state. So where are you living? I mean, you're in Omaha, Nebraska, right? So what's the status there? What's the kind of?
Well, Nebraska was an interesting case because they never really fully locked down. There were other states where they had full, complete lockdowns. I think Nebraska's was like a little less severe for the most part. So it was possible to go out and do things. Now, restaurants, for instance, for quite some time were like takeout only. So you were not allowed to sit down, but that's changed. There are still some places where it's takeout only, but most places you can also eat in. In fact, I went to Barnes & Noble with my mom last year, kind of like during the point where everybody was locked down. And the manager there told us they were one of only 10 Barnes and Noble locations in the entire country that were still open. So yeah, Nebraska's was relatively lenient, I think. I mean, again, there were some measures put into place, but it was nothing like, California or New York or any of these other places.
So because that's something interesting. I don't know how. I mean, I thought I think no one really expected things to take these curves, and then so I was just wondering. So what was your first reaction with the like when when the virus started spreading and then you heard it's coming to the U.S. and
Well, that's a good question because I think maybe not like many people. I don't know how best to describe it. I mean, but I will say this: like many people, I was concerned with it because it's like we don't really know what's going on. There wasn't a lot of information coming out, but it seemed different from like Ebola, for instance, or the Zika virus. Like these are two viruses from Africa, and it just seemed like the way that it was being presented, even early on, was not necessarily in the media. I think the media jumped on it and threw a lot of fuel on the fire, like unnecessary fuel on the fire later. But it seemed like, hey, look, this is coming from China, the communist government there. It's probably not being very truthful about what's going on, what its origins are, whether or not it's as deadly as some people are whispering that it is. So this unknown kind of added a lot to the fear. And I remember I went to Australia last year to teach some workshops, and my brother, before I left, he sent me a list of things because he's very up on, I would say he's very up on current events before things kind of become more breaking news. And so he said the same thing, like, we really don't know what's going on. We really don't understand what the virus is going to be like, so it's best to take some precautions. Here's what you should do. So he sent me like a list of things to do. And so one of those things was to buy N95 masks. And had I known, I totally would have bought like hundreds, but I only bought like 20. What was really interesting too, when I bought them, it was probably toward the end of January of last year. And I went to this place in town in Omaha, and it's a tools place, like for mechanics and people who work in like physical labor type jobs. And I asked, "Do you have N95 masks?" And the lady behind the counter was like, "I don't even know what that is. Let me look it up on the computer." And it turns out they had them. And like by the time I got back to the States, like a month later, it was like, I could be wrong about the exact timing, but it was like there was nowhere to even find them because the panic had started to spread, and people were buying them up like crazy. And I emailed my host for my workshop in Queensland, and he said, I was like, how many people are dying of this coronavirus thing? And he said, well, so far in the entire country, there's only been 9. So I think you're probably going to be okay. And so I was like, all right. So, I flew to Australia, and it was weird seeing people wearing masks. I was like, I would be so embarrassed to wear a mask. Like this just seems like it's just, I don't know. It just seems a little over the top. But things were pretty normal when I was in Australia. Fortunately, I got back when I did, because I got back toward the end of February, and then, it was about mid-March, things like the lockdown began. And basically all the insanity that we're dealing with now started becoming like this new reality. Yeah. So early on, I think just out of purely not really knowing what to expect, not having enough good information, I was as cautious as anybody, and I was with the exception of going through the airport, not wearing a mask, and not really caring to do such a thing. As things ramped up. And you'll remember, too, early on, we were told by everybody, including Dr. Fauci, there's no reason to wear a mask. And, of course, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, but there was a huge about-face as far as that was concerned. But, that was
it was the same. It was the same around Europe. Like, there was people said it's not really useful. We don't know. It's like, just don't buy it, because otherwise there will going to be shortages for those who really need it and works in hospitals. And then, I think it's, the dynamics was pretty much the same but I'm asking because the thing is that strikes me the most, because I was actually I traveled quite a lot just before the pandemic started. So I was caught in Spain. I was touring with Nanowar, and then all of a sudden I decided to move to Serbia. And then I moved to Serbia, and of course, then I heard the news, from Spain. From I was living in Serbia, so of course I knew the situation there, and of course I had my family in Italy, so I was like, and by the way, I just moved from Berlin, so I still had like contacts in Berlin. I was keeping like in touch with the situation in a bunch of different places. And so this is something interesting, because at first it looks like no one was really buying that was going into the craziness of locking down. Like people thought Italy's crazy to do that. Like in Germany it would never happen, and it's not going to happen in Spain. And all of a sudden, like the tide turned, and everyone decided that was the right policy to take. And I don't know, it made sense to me at the time, because it's pretty easy. Like if you think that every person that goes out has the capability of infecting like two persons, then you got one round, it's one person infects two, then the second round it's like two persons infect other four, and these things eventually grows exponentially. And so this is a pretty, I have some mathematical background, so you understand it. Exponential growth is not good, even though you might have a very small fatality rate among the infected. If the infection grows exponentially, then at some point you will still end up with a very large number of infected people, and that will overwhelm the system, like the hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
And so at first I really thought that these things make sense. I mean, it's the only way we need to stop like this contagion to continue. And it looked like, well, if the virus spreads only on our legs, as they say, it is walking like on our legs, it's going. Then I guess it makes sense to stop everything and like make the virus disappear, and then just resume,
Mm-hmm.
back with the normal life. Anyway,
If only it had actually happened that way, right?
exactly. So that's the thing, because that was the option we were presented with, that it's either exponential growth of the infection and subsequent like overwhelming pressure on the on hospitals, or you can try to shut down everything and relieve some pressure from the healthcare system, and but stop everything, like prevent any kind of activity from taking place, at least as many activities as you can.
Yeah, that seemed very short-sighted. And I know the rationale early on was what everybody was repeating here was 2 weeks to stop the spread or flatten the curve. And so, the intention behind it actually wasn't even to stop the virus. People basically understood like there's not really going to be any way to stop the virus. So the whole point of these lockdowns is to make it so that it just slows down so that we're not overwhelming the hospital system. And, whether or not that was like a wise choice is up for debate, but at least it was very clear what the purpose was going to be. But as a layman, because I don't work as a scientist, I do try to keep up with what's going on, and I have I'm not like, how should I say, I'm not like a cynic about things. I can be skeptical, but I can have my mind change. Like if you present me with the data, but after a while it just seemed like what's the point of these lockdowns? Like, because the longer they went on, it's like it didn't really seem like they accomplished much of anything. And then the thing that was especially insane was that there were countries that were doing like multiple ones. It was like a sequel to a crappy movie that nobody really wanted to watch in the first place. And nobody was ever like, look, maybe this wasn't a good idea. Let's try something different.
That's I like the way you framed it as a sequel of a crappy movie, because that's exactly what it is. It's like, for me, I mean, the turning point was in October, I must say, because I still believed like in this narrative that still you need to slow down the spread of the virus, and if things were sort of under control during the summer. And you could argue that was because we sort of kept the virus under control early on. Like we managed to spread, you look at the curve and you see that the curve goes down after a while you do the lockdown. And so you start, this is the usual association, right? Because people have seen the curve rise, then there was this lockdown, and then people see the curve going down. But that's like me, I don't know, like taking a lighter and look, oh, I'm the master of fire. Well, it's just a fucking lighter. I mean, anyone can do that. You are not the master of fire. Anyone can do that.
Yeah.
Or just telling you, oh, look, tomorrow the sun will rise. Oh, nice. It's very. So the bottom line is that no one was telling us. I mean, no one was foreseeing the possibility that the curve might just go up and down on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, the turning point was to see that in October, when we had the famous second wave taking place, the death toll was exactly the same as during the first wave, except the first wave took place in a situation where no one was giving shit about anything. There were concerts going on. There were people going to restaurants. There was no limitation whatsoever. So there was like the mindset back in until we had the first lockdown in Italy was completely different from October, and the behavior of people. So people were not wearing masks. People were not, were not social distancing. So all of these elements were lacking in March. And yet you see that the outcome of the death toll is exactly the same. Like the peak death toll per day in Italy, at least, was around 800. And so it's really hard to explain how two phenomena that originate with very different conditions, in the sense that back in October, we had by and large social distancing. We had caps on restaurants. There were like a lot of there were no concerts taking place. There were people wearing masks all the time. There was smart working, so people working from home. So the reduction, even you might even say, well, people were still going out, right? Granted, but there was like with respect to the March baseline, there was a lot of movement less going on because people were not going to large events. There were not hundreds of thousands of people gathering in stadiums. There were not thousands of people gathering in concert halls, just like in March and February. So these things were lacking back in October. And yet the phenomena that you observe is exactly the same. Like for me, that's a smoking gun. I mean, you have you are acting so much on this variable, which is people's behavior. And you did change a lot, like despite the fact that, again, like some people were meeting, yes, granted, but they were meeting instead of, 1,000 times per week. Now it's 10 times per week. Just, it's still like 10 to 100 times less than what was going on before. And everyone was wearing masks. Like by and large, seriously, like, people still say, oh, but I've seen someone with the mask. Like it's not really, again, it's like 1 out of 10 people, and still like you cannot blame it all on like a small minority which is not complying, if this is such an important variable. And the same thing happened all throughout Europe. Like the second wave started basically within 1 or 2 weeks with the same dynamics approximately in every European country. And then it's clear it's something that's related to climate. It's not that Germany and Italy and France and Spain conspired, everyone just right in that moment, to not care about restrictions anymore, just out of the blue. Of course, there might be something greater going on. It's not that it's related to local behavior. You cannot really explain that unless, and again, I think we're going to talk about this, but that's part of the magical thinking that is behind then the rationale of the COVID restrictions. Because of course, when you observe different countries having the same kind of phenomena, you cannot just attribute it to the same, you had different countries with different regulations, different rules, different people, and yet you see that the same phenomena starts in all countries at the same time. It's like saying, well, it's cold in winter in France and Italy because Italian people and French people at the same time decided it's cold, decided that they have this feeling at this point.
Yeah.
It's cold because it's cold. It's like the thing is going on by itself. It doesn't depend on behavior. It's like the COVID is there. It doesn't depend on the way people behave.
Right. Yeah. And I think that really what it seems to come down to, and again, you've looked at the numbers, you've crunched the numbers, and you've made, I think, some really good arguments using just the data that we have available that really anybody can review. Might take some training to understand exactly what it is that you're looking at, but you can extrapolate like you can make a certain a judgment based on what you're looking at. But I think from a layman's perspective, like mine, I'm looking at things and seeing like what you're seeing. You can just take a look even at. I think one of the most telling ones actually is like all these failed predictions that keep being made by experts. One of the it's interesting because to me it seems like COVID more than anything has shown the limits of of most people's intellectual curiosity. And in fact, a friend of mine who works in a hospital said that exact thing. He said, it was amazing to him that like the doctor, this was probably like in maybe January or February, the doctor was like, yeah, I guess it looks like this uptick in COVID cases really may just have been due to like seasonal, upper respiratory infections like we see every year. Like he was amazed that like, wow, like I guess it really just happened like that. I mean, it had nothing to do with behavior. It was just the uptick was due to that. And he said, there are some people who otherwise are very intelligent, people who are doctors, they're not idiots. Like to get through medical school, it takes some serious brains, but the missing link is this intellectual curiosity. And again, that doesn't mean cynicism or being a contrarian and just trying to say the exact opposite, but rather taking a look and trying to find a nuanced view as to what might really be causing or contributing to a certain thing, let's say.
I think that's part of the religious mindset that really see behind this behavior, in the sense that um, you see like very intelligent people believing in God. So there's no wonder about that, in the sense that you can really, so the human mind can very easily detach what is rationality and science from what is faith and like emotion, so to say. And so there's no wonder that there's people who, again, there's like scientists believing in God. I don't find it weird. It's like it's a fact. It's a matter of fact. I don't have anything against it. The issue here is that what is regarded as science has now crossed the line. So it's not related to the part of the scientist's brain that is rational, so to say. It just moved to the religious part, and I think that's pretty evident in the sense that you can see. This is the typical thing that I mean, there's a bunch of indicators like that. But first thing is, of course, you try to just outright deny the existence of evidence that goes against what you're claiming. So you start from, actually, this is the thing that these people start from their world, from their theory. So they got a theory about how the virus spreads. So that's so to say, it's like a dogma. And from that on, they build a worldview model. So they have their own worldview. Now, it happens that the world, when you apply this view on a large scale, doesn't work like that. It's not like if you prevent people from meeting, then the virus stops spreading. This is like, it has been shown time and again. Maybe not in China, because in China we can discuss about the data from China. But anyway, the thing is that you can see that there's clearly no correlation between stringent policies and the spread of the virus. The virus goes on regardless. You might say, well, at some point then the curve goes down. Yeah. Actually, if you really look in detail at this data, and it's pretty clear, for example, for the UK and Belgium during the second wave, is that the lockdowns were enacted like 1 or 2 days or 3 days after the peak of the curve. So you cannot really say that the curve goes down because of the lockdown, because the lockdown was actually enacted after the peak. And actually, the peak is just the number of cases that you register on that day. So you should shift the peak of the curve backwards, because it's not, if you register this case today, it means it has infected probably 1 week earlier on. And so you should shift all these numbers by a few days, which means that actually lockdowns usually takes place. And this is, again, if you just go and look into the numbers, lockdowns take place a few days to a week or even later on than after the actual reaching of the infection peak. So you cannot really tell that the cases are going down. And this is, it's something you can easily read from the data. But regardless, like people with this mindset, they have their theory. No. The virus only stops when you prevent people from meeting. That's it. That's the dogma, right? It's not like maybe there are other channels, like maybe the virus is just spreading with the air. Maybe there's different ways people react to the virus, or maybe even, it's enough for the virus to propagate only, even if just 0.1% of the population is still allowed to travel freely, then it's like that makes no difference if if you stop 99% or if you stop 0%. Maybe you just need a very small percentage of the population to spread it. I mean, whatever the answer is, like that's a fact that these measures do not counter anything. There's like, at least you cannot argue that the curve goes down. I mean, the curve would go down by itself. That's clear. Maybe you could make a case for the curve going down faster. But anyway, so that's the first thing of the religious mindset. So you have a dogma and you start from that and you look at the world. It doesn't go the other way around. That's science, right? So science, you have a theory, you test it against the data. The data tells you, okay, the theory is good, or no, you should change your theory. And that's how your science progresses. So science progresses one dead theory at a time. That's how the saying goes, right? So you should test your theory against the data. And now the thing is that whenever you find some kind of evidence that does not fit your worldview, you have some shifting in the theory's parameters, or you're making some ad hoc hypothesis.
It reminds me of a joke that I heard that this basically sums that up perfectly, because this is exactly what you see. Like, and you don't even have to look that hard. Like the evidence for even experts doing this is all over the place. But there's a joke. This guy calls up a psychologist and he says, "Doc, you got to help my son. He thinks he's a corpse." And he's like, "Can you get him in? Is there any way you can get him in this week? I really need your help to convince him that he's not a corpse." So he brings his son in. And the doctor says, "So, you think you're a corpse, right?" He said, "No, I don't think I'm a corpse, doctor. I know I'm a corpse." So the psychologist says, "Well, corpses don't bleed, right? You agree on that?" And he said, "Yeah, of course. Everyone knows corpses don't bleed." So he said, "Okay, so if I were to prick you, you wouldn't bleed." He says, "No, absolutely not. I'm a corpse." So he takes a pin, pokes his finger, and he starts bleeding. And then his son goes, "Huh, I guess corpses do bleed." But this is exactly what we're seeing. It's like, there's always a shift right when they're confronted with the fact that which should just be a theory has started to become a belief. And so in order to justify the belief, you got to start snaking around and finding a way to make it work.
But that's exactly the cult mindset, right? Like when you see, I don't know, like take the Crusaders, like at some point you win the war, you say, "Oh, it's thanks to God." Then you lose the war against the Ottomans. Sorry, who was back there? It was not they were fighting with the Ottomans at some point. But anyway, just take against the Arabs, whatever, Salahuddin, and then you lose the war.
Yeah, Saladin, yeah.
So I was mixing up stuff, sorry. But you lose the war, and then you say, "Oh, there were some infidels like betraying us." So it's always, it's like, you never accept that there might be some issues with your worldview. Like, your worldview is correct. If facts do not match your worldview, then you need to add. But the nice thing, you do this a posteriori. It's like you do it after it happened to excuse. Because real science works like this. Like, you do a prediction, you say, "Okay, under these conditions, I predict that this happens." And so, for example, as Dr. Fauci said in the US, in these conditions, then Florida will be a house on fire, and California will be like a perfect place because they lock down. It's like they will be much better. They will have much better numbers. And then it turns out the exact complete opposite. And then it turns out, oh, but that's because people were not locking down hard enough in California, or all this sort of made up excuses, like people are not complying.
And you just ask them, like, well, how do you know that? And like, is there any evidence to show that people weren't complying? I have yet to hear anybody say, "Oh yeah, we know that they're not doing X, Y, and Z." The data shows that people in the U.S. are like largely compliant, just as in the U.S. isn't, for instance. But the same elsewhere. I read recently Germany mandated that you have to wear like medical grade masks, and they've still seen a 15% spike in cases.
Yes. But they will still say that, and that's what I mean. So I can go inside from my actual experience on social media, and that's what happens all the time. Because when you try to point out this fact, you really, like, people get really upset, and then they started to tell you that, "Oh, but you see, that's because Italians never comply with the rules." Like, even granted, like let's assume that no one complies with the rules. You're still not allowed to go to restaurants. You're still not allowed to go to the stadium. You're still not allowed to go to theaters, cinemas. Like schools were closed for a number of weeks, universities closed, bars are closed, pubs are closed. There's like, how many less interactions are you having with respect to your normal life? It's like it's still hundreds less.
Yeah.
It's still hundreds less. So you cannot. So and this is my reasoning. Then it's, if you have a function that depends on many variables like this, like the function is the number of infections or the number of dead people, right? It depends on the number of contacts that you have, how the virus spreads. I would say like temperature, age, or I think the thing just.
What are you looking at?
Yeah, sorry. I was saying that if you say that this thing depends on many variables, then when you claim that even changing by a lot the effect on the number of deaths by changing the number of contacts that people have, then it means that contacts do not matter that much with respect to the other variables.
Exactly.
Like if I'm telling you that even if I change the number of contacts if I reduce it by a factor of 10, you're still getting the same outcome. It means that this number, this function, does not really depend on this number, right? Because if I change it by a factor of 10 and the output is the same, that's, it's mathematics. It's pretty, you're just telling me that this function does not depend on this variable that much. And so why insisting on reducing the contact that much? Why investing so much energy and efforts?
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing. So that's the other thing that happens all the time. When you point out that some places, and like in the US, you can mention Florida, I think most notably, but there's South Dakota and there's Japan, there's a bunch of places that didn't lock down. And still, they were not overwhelmed by this continuous exponential growth of cases, yet the curve was going down. What people tell you that, but you cannot really compare what's going on there with us. But there are two implications for this thing. First of all, what we're doing here, we took it from China. So can we really compare Europe to China? So let's even granted that what the Chinese did worked in China, then why are we doing it here if you cannot compare policies between countries? But the second thing you're telling me is that other factors that are country specific matter much more than the policy that you're implying. Because what I'm telling is, I have two different countries, granted, with two very different policies, and they get the same outcome. So if you tell me that policy that matters less than the specific properties of these countries, what you're telling me is that policy doesn't matter. That you cannot really. Then why are you investing so much in policy, in reduction of contacts, and why are you investing so much money and human lives in trying to suppress?
Yeah, and the thing about that sort of a thing too is that most people, again, they're not and this isn't like a slam against people, it's just an observation. I don't think most people are intellectually curious enough to question what they're hearing. Because questioning something doesn't necessarily mean that you're taking the opposite position. It's just you want to know if it's true or not. Like there are people that I follow and people that I trust very much in a variety of different fields. But I always like to double check because I want to trust but verify. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes I think they're right maybe in a certain context, but not, it's not like the gospel truth, as it were. And sometimes I think they have an overbelief. And so it's not necessarily the case. But we really shouldn't be doing that with something that involves people's lives and livelihoods. And yet that seems to be the primary motivation, is that most people don't really question what they're being told. So they hear something, you mentioned in your podcast with Pat, a lot of people don't really have the training to interpret the statistics or look at the data and come out with some sort of a conclusion. And they also don't have the time. So they're relying on intermediary sources like the media or, I don't know, like a trusted individual who's going through the resources or whatever, and then is giving them, an opinion. But a lot of times if you ask somebody something like that, like what you were just talking about, they don't have an answer because they've never broached the topic in the media or anywhere else.
Actually, they do. So I had some very interesting interaction in the last few days, and I think it's very symptomatic of the way that the human mind works. Because, and again, it's related to this COVID thing. So sorry, to this cultish thing behind the COVID. It's the fact that it's been taken for granted as a religion, where the priests are the scientists and the political elite, like whatever the scientists and the political elite says it's like the truth. We have to believe science. First of all, like as if science was something you believe. It's like the first rule of science: you should question what you're saying.
Yeah.
And second of all is that there's no such thing as scientific consensus around these issues right now, because granted, it might be a minority, but there's a substantial minority. There's lots of scientists who do not agree on these policies. They do not agree on the way the data has been read. I mean, we can talk about the Great Barrington Declaration. But I can mention, like, even if you don't want to get into that, there's tens of other researchers I know who do not. They do not agree with the way that this thing is being sold to the public. But this is, like, again, going back to the religious mentality. That's what the scientists said. That's what the experts said. I believe that. Full stop. There's no debate about that. So I had a discussion with a friend of mine who is otherwise, I would say, is well-read and is not an idiot. But that was the point. I was showing, look, there's this other evidence from other scientists, and they point out these facts. Then you can judge on your own. And he says, no. I know that I'm not trained into this stuff, and so I just believe what the scientists say. I said, like, these guys are scientists too, and there's an open scientific debate, and you should probably listen to both sides of the argument, because it's not just because the media and the politicians from not from all the world, but most of the politicians and most of the media have exposed this kind of thesis. They're supporting this side of the argument. Doesn't mean that the other side has no relevance whatsoever. At least you could at least give a try and listen to it. They said, no. You should, if this evidence is good, then it should be peer reviewed. And I said, well, this is peer reviewed. Well, then if it's peer reviewed, it means that it was not good enough to be taken into account. Like, okay, all right. Then it's like, again, it's like a religion, in the sense that you say you chose a subset of experts as gods, and you trust whatever they say no matter what. You don't even try to get at least familiarized with some other kind of evidence, and not even with the logic that is behind that, because at some point that's also something that is being, when you try to argue for these positions that we should be more careful with lockdowns and restrictions, and there's good evidence that they do not really contribute that much to the reduction of the spread. The first thing is that people associate you with being COVID denier. You are anti-science. You are, all the anti-vaxxer, or you are. There's dead people everywhere. So, like, we had so many dead people in Italy. You shouldn't talk about these things for respect to every sort of irrational argument. Because I'm not claiming that COVID is not dangerous. I never made any single claim about the danger, how COVID. I don't know. It's like about the dangers of COVID. I never made any single claim about the trade-off between economy and containment of the measures. I'm just talking about these measures, that they are not effective to start with. That's the whole issue, and people don't understand it. They always conflate all the issues together, and again, it's part of the religious mentality.
Yeah.
And by the way, I was this whole I started this whole debate I'm mentioning. You started because this guy was mentioning the fact that there were people protesting in Rome because of the lockdowns, and he was saying, "Oh, look at these assholes! They are protesting, and they are all together now. All the efforts we made in last months, they're gonna be ruined by these people meeting right now." And I said, "Look, this is a witch hunt. You shouldn't do a witch hunt. This is a fucking witch hunt. First of all, there's no evidence that the virus spreads outside, so these people were protesting outside. So this is anti-scientific. Second of all, you're getting mad. You're like, it's a witch hunt. You're like pointing your finger at a group of people who are desperate because they lost their jobs and they have no income, and many of them, they're really desperate. Most of them are on the brink of mental illness, and there's a lot of people who committed suicide. So it's how I found it really horrible to, yeah.
No, I was going to say it's very unbecoming
Sorry.
because you're right. It's like, yeah, we're told in other, let's say, fields of discussion that certain binaries are simply, let's say, a cultural relic and they're not actually true. But everything else, it has this binary thinking when it comes down to people's beliefs and whether it is, again, because it's taken the place of like a religious belief. So whether it's COVID or anything else, it's like, oh, well, you either believe that this is the most like deadly pandemic we've ever faced and there's no measure that's too extreme, or you don't even believe that it exists. And if it sounds like I'm being uncharitable, like talk to anybody, because that's the first anybody who is similar to the friend that you're describing, who I'm sure is a great guy. I'm not trying to be insulting, but like that kind of mentality you find all over the place. And it really is like it's an either or approach. So they don't really ask your opinion. They just assume because you don't believe like in their religion, I'll just use that term. Well, then, clearly you're blinded. You have scales over your eyes, and you're an infidel. And people might not like hearing that characterization, but it is accurate because like I've had to deal with this talking to whether it's family members or other friends, even when I've shown them data. Like I had a family member who we had a discussion, and there were like 8 points that he made, and they were all wrong. And I'm not like, and I'm not trying to be mean, but it was just like, again, like his points all came from either the media or what he thought he saw on the media. So I put together an email, and it was all from scientific journals or respected scientists in the field making a certain case, or from mainstream media sources. And I just explained, I said, look, you don't have to believe what I believe, but I know your position very well, so you should at least know my position. And so I sent all this information. I didn't even get a response to it. So this is one of the issues, is that people don't see it as a belief. What they see it as is like, this is the truth. So like if you question it, like there's something wrong with you, not me. So why should I accept any other approach to things? And it's completely wrong.
It's absolutely the same thing. I mean, it happens to me so many times that I'm trying to be patient when this online discussion start. I mean, so to start with, I never ever in, I don't know, I'm online presence. Maybe it's 13 years social media. Never ever started an argument, a debate. Like I always refrain from it. I feel that for COVID, it's worth doing it because um, I've never seen fascism or a regime like living under it, but if I've seen it once in my life, that's this time because like restrictions with no scientific basis. We have there's this scientific council that is deciding when you can go out of home, who you can visit, if you can work or not, what kind of they were checking on the amount of food you are ordering during Easter. Like, isn't this insane? Like the police checking how much food you're ordering because it could be an indicator of you having a large party at your home. Like police entering your home and checking who is there. I mean, this is the closest thing to fascism, to any kind of regime I've ever seen in my life.
Absolutely.
There's absolutely no democracy, because you might say, oh, but science is not democratic. Yeah, but then show me the evidence. Show me the fucking evidence. That's like the what this scientific council is doing when they say, oh, restaurants should shut down from 6 onwards. Then show me the evidence that reducing the time.
At 6:01, that's when the virus wakes up.
Then show me at least some data and make a very. You're restricting people's liberties. You have to make a very strong case for that. And no one has ever published anything on. There's nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing. There's no really. And all these scientists that are in this council, I've never seen any official document on saying, look, if we close the restaurants from 10 to, I don't know, to 5 a.m., like there's a night curfew, we estimate the cases to go down by 50%. Make a prediction, you test a theory. Does it go, how science should work. There's no prediction, there's no analysis. There's just someone who say, oh, we should shut these things down. And you forget that, first of all, you're restricting people's liberties. That it's unacceptable in a democratic society. You have to make a strong case for that. You cannot just say, it's not a regime. That's basically the basis, the foundations of our societies. We entered this because you said it's 2 weeks. It's not 2 weeks. I mean, it's gonna be 1 year and a few months, and it's not like just because you're a scientist then you're entitled to choose other people's life, unless you can make a very strong case for that.
Yeah.
And no one ever did that. They just rely on anecdote and theories. And if they made a theory and they made some test to it, I would be willing to change my mind. They never did it. They never dared to test their theories. They never dared to make estimates on how much this restriction of your civil liberties impacts. How much do I estimate? There's nothing like that.
Yeah. I think the other thing too is that people assume that scientists don't have any bias because science is supposed to be the ultimate arbiter of fact. And but again, like you ask people, okay, well, what's science? Like they can't define it. What's the scientific method? They don't really know. Like, what does it mean to believe science? Like it's a non sequitur because like there's nothing to believe. It's like it's not a belief system. And the fact that people are willing to say I believe in science tells me that they either don't know what science means or they're simply repeating things that they've heard other people say. They can't really articulate why they believe it. And so again, it's like I think if COVID has shown us anything, it's that people aren't really willing to question their assumptions. People kind of want to operate on easy mode. Like, well, look, if this is what the experts are saying, let's do it. But experts get things wrong all the time, even en masse. Like, I mean, a great example, I wrote an email yesterday. I have an email list, and I write a daily email. And one of them was about Jack LaLanne. And in America, if you know anything about fitness, Jack LaLanne is like, I mean, he was the king because there was a time, this is going to sound insane to people, but there was a time, at least in the US, where most doctors believed that exercise was harmful to people. They believed that you could overexert yourself, you'd become muscle bound and lethargic, you would enlarge your heart.
When was this?
This was in the 1950s, 1940s, 50s. And it was like there were people who were like they were going to become police officers or firefighters, and they would train at Jack LaLanne's gym, like on the sneak, because they didn't want to deal with the fallout. Like they knew it was BS that exercise would have all these negative effects. But I mean, now it's basically universally recognized that exercise is good for you, and even strenuous exercise, especially strenuous exercise. But the scientific consensus at the time, not based on any science, but simply just pure speculation on the part of a large number of doctors, was that exercise was going to enlarge your heart, make you muscle bound and lethargic, was going to shorten your lifespan. Like they just believed it had all these negative impacts, and most of them just didn't question it. And it wasn't until there were enough people who were challenging the notion that things changed. And this is just one example of many. There are plenty of others. So to believe that scientists can't be biased, or that scientists can't, or that science, quote unquote, can't be politicized in any way, is just naive, and it just doesn't jive with reality.
It's very naive, but again, I would agree with the statement. I believe in the scientific method, in the sense that science is a method. You never get to, I mean, in my opinion, you never get to a 100% answer. You always get, I mean, the whole thing is about error bars. It's about estimating the likelihood of a certain statement to be true. And so you have statements that are true with a certain degree of confidence, statements about the real world, and statements which are true with a lesser degree of confidence. That's the whole point of science. It's about putting, like estimating how likely is this fact to be reflected in a real statement about the real world. And so you always need to confront yourself with the real world and with the data. And this is exactly the thing that is missing now. And by the way, there's another very important thing about science and scientific theory, and it's about philosophy. And people often forget this point, but scientific theories can be treated as such only if they're falsifiable. Mm-hmm. So you can treat a statement about how the world works only if you can think about an experiment that could falsify this. Because you can always make up statements that fit, like, for example, the existence of God, it's something you can always, you cannot really disprove it. And you cannot prove it but you cannot even disprove it in a way. You can make arguments for and against, but there's no way to argue. You can always say, by its own definition, it's something uh, beyond, and so you can always find ways to justify it, right? So that's not a scientific statement. But statements about COVID is that unless you do this kind of measures, then the curve would grow exponentially, for example. And so this is a kind of experiment you can think of, right? So if the theory about COVID spread is like, oh, until you don't get to herd immunity, then the virus will spread and then it will saturate the health system of a country. This is a scientific statement which has been proven false, and you just need one example to disprove a theory. Like Newton's gravity was disproven when they found out that there was Eddington's experiment in 1919. So, and then the perihelion of mass. There were like 2 or 3 experiments that were showing evidence in favor of a new theory in front of a theory that was tested for 200 years and proved very successful. So this is the same thing here. You can say, well, but after doing these measures, which is not true, but even granted, that's the case. The theory is only true when it's true. It's reliable when it passes the falsification test. And so for this specific case, I would say that falsification is it's something that happened. There are effects that are in direct contrast that do not fit this theory.
Yeah,
they are in direct contrast with the predictions of this theory. It's about making and that's what you said. That the experts got it wrong from the very beginning. They said it's 2 weeks, then it's 2 months, then it's coming again. It's pretty clear that all of their predictions went wrong, right?
and I think to add on to that, I'm sure that I speak to a lot of different people about informally, like lockdowns and things like that, and even people who are like the thing is too, people seem to think that it's largely a political thing, like, oh, if you're conservative then you just think this automatically, or oh, if you're liberal you think this automatically. And I haven't really found that to be the case. I think first of all, a lot of people are relatively in the middle but might lean one way or the other, and a lot of people, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on, seem to have criticisms not even based on, because like you're a professional scientist, but simply based on observations on some of the stuff that you've talked about, that just their BS detector goes off, and it goes off enough times in a row seeing something similar that they're like, well, why wouldn't I question it? But the problem then seems to be too is because it has reached like a religious fervor for people's beliefs about the right thing to do, how to contain the virus. Even if people do come up with some sort of an argument or evidence or anything like that contradicts what they believe to be true, they're almost uniformly attacked. And it could be verbally, it could be respectful, it could be whatever, but people pile on them. So you think about like a scientist who might come out with something that seems to go against the consensus. Like, these people always have to swim upstream, and they're made to have a difficult time of it, but they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. Now, I think in cases like the ones that you were providing earlier about how they kind of upended like 200 years of established belief, I don't know if there was any politics surrounding it, but I get the sense, and I could very well be wrong, that there are probably a lot of scientists, a lot of people who've looked at the data and done some research, who would agree with everything that you're saying, but like to speak out, to say something about it, to express some disagreement. We're no longer talking about saying, let's question something that's not at all been politicized, but rather let's question people's belief system and expect them to jettison it for something that works better, because it seems like there's a lot at stake for these people, because this is an argument that's become politicized unnecessarily.
But again, talking about politics, that's exactly to go back to the religious cult stuff. It's something that you really see in politics as well, right? When you take a political stance, then you need to you also are adhering to a certain belief system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think especially like, for example, about communist regimes, there's a lot of parallels you can draw between like believing religiously in the communist system, or believing religiously in Islam, or believing religiously in COVID measures. because in all these systems, if you think about it, it's like, first of all, the need to, like, this only works if everyone does it. So you need to convert other people, for example,
Yeah.
when you're an extremist, or communists. The whole country needs to be run like this, and there might be some conspirators. We need to get rid of them. And that's this also, like the witch hunt mentality, right? So witch hunt is something that originated in Christendom in Western Europe, but again, it's hunting someone who you think is like making the whole system fail. There must be some responsible, right? So you had saboteurs in communist systems, you had the witches or the Jews, or you had always someone to put the blame on. It's a minority. Same thing with COVID. So you find people who do not comply. They are responsible for the fact that these measures do not work. Like they cannot even possibly fathom that the measures do not work. Maybe because they are wrong. Maybe they are not addressing the issues in the right. I mean, just keep mind open to that possibility. But no, you already decided that measures are good, and the whole things make sense. I mean, there is some coherent logic. You can make again. I'm not endorsing that, but you can make like sort of a narrative, like a plausible narrative for communism. You can make that for religion, for any kind of religion. You can make some sort of argument based on the fact, like man sins, and you need some kind of moral system, and you need to do this and that, and you need to like enforce it on the population. Like the same thing with communist values. You need to you need to make this huge change in the mindset of the people. Same thing with COVID. Like you need to make this huge change. You're like forbidden to visit your friends. You need to stay far away from your family. A lot of things that are natural. Like in religion, you have the same. Like you have a lot of control on your sexual sphere, right? Which is something natural. Like you try looking for a sexual intercourse. There's nothing weird with it, but they put a lot of pressure on that, and there's a lot of shame assigned to it. And that's the same thing with COVID. Like you just want to interact with people. What's wrong with that? No, you cannot do that. And that's exactly the same mentality that you see when the priest is telling you shouldn't hang out with girls unless you're married. Same thing. You shouldn't hang out with people because there's this COVID thing is going around.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, and you sort of feel that you're not doing anything wrong, but you have to obey to this law, even though it's in stark contrast with human nature. And there's a lot of other elements. Like you feel right when you report your neighbor. Your neighbor is doing something. It's like in communist regimes. Oh, my neighbor has just said that this is against the regime. He just criticized Stalin. We come and get rid of him.
If the guy won't, if the guy won't trim his hedges, he won't clean his yard. You just call up the neighborhood commissar. Oh, this guy said something against Stalin. You don't have to worry about the guy anymore.
Exactly. I mean, it's like again, these guys are having during Christian times there was this thing about the Easter celebration in Jewish communities that were forbidden in Spain, for example, and then there were neighbors reporting on people they supposed they were Jews, and they were reporting them to the police. And it's the same thing now. It's like I don't freaking understand how can people find this normal, like calling the police to report your neighbor to the police. It's like spying on your neighbors. When did this become acceptable? Like, can you really make a case for that?
And especially in the U.S. too, where it's like, in many ways, a line has been drawn where it's either like support the police or defund the police. Now, I think the overwhelming majority of people support policing, obviously, provided that it is being done in a moral way that upholds people's rights. But it's the same people in so many cases who would absolutely side with defund the police, who are all too happy to report their neighbors, other people to the police for the most minor of infractions.
You should be skeptical of the police all the time.
I agree.
Like of every you should be
Any
skeptical of
authority
politics.
Yeah,
and this is something that I find really upsetting because I'm a metal musician, right? I'm a rock musician, among other things, and like seeing how the rock community and the musicians community just obey the law, like after years and years of rebellion, and I'm not even saying you should rebel, but just question what has been told to you, like question it.
Yeah.
Like no, it's that's really mind blowing.
Well, there's a meme that has gone around that I find is very apt for this situation. It was like 1990s, and it's Zach De La Rocha from Rage Against the Machine. Fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. And it's like now, fuck you, do what they tell you.
Exactly.
it really, the mind boggles. And again, you ask people like, well, what changed? Like back then you were so skeptical of authority. Like why aren't you skeptical of authority anymore? I mean, I think deep down, again, a lot of it goes down to people's political bending, and I think that they feel like, well, now my side has the upper hand, so of course I'm not going to rebel. But it's ridiculous because, like you said, it doesn't. To me, again, I have like a conditional support for any figure of authority, provided that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and they're not interfering with my rights or the rights of other people in the community. Then I support them. But the minute that they start to encroach on those rights or even think about it, like you have to speak up and say something.
Yeah.
And so the idea that, for example, well, if you get vaccinated, and I'm not against vaccination by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm against like vaccine passports because it's just ridiculously draconian. So the idea is like, well, we'll give you your rights back if you now submit to this condition. It's like it makes zero sense whatsoever, and it's like why anybody would support that is just beyond me.
I completely agree. It's based on scientism. It's based on faith. And again, I think it's also something that is faith related in the sense that many people like to show off their faith
Yeah,
because they associate it with something positive. And so you see many, for example, communists showing off their communists because they want to show that they are very good people, not because they actually behave like people that have those ideals, but
yeah,
they just want to show those, it's like virtue signaling.
yeah. Well, they're all uniformly scumbags. So as long as they keep their hands up, so
Same
we can
thing with
recognize.
Christians. There's many people showing off their faith in God just to show off because they want to appear that they're like good people and they believe in God just because they believe in God and they believe in Jesus, which it's not a good or bad thing per se. It's like you're a good person regardless of, it doesn't, I don't care about what you state you believe. I care about what you do.
Yeah.
So that's
No, it's a very apt statement because, like, I mean, people like, for example, wearing like doing mask selfies on social media.
yeah.
I mean, I think selfies in general are pretty stupid, but like, especially wearing a mask or like the "I voted" stickers that people have on. It's like no one gives a shit that you voted. Like,
Exactly.
or like I got my vaccination, or all these other things. Again, it's like what you said. It's virtue signaling, and it's an attempt to do exactly what the people that they would. I mean, many of these people are very critical of Christians, and are all too happy to poke fun at them. But they do the exact same activities, but something that suits them, and they just don't see the parallel.
Exactly. And I mean, this is, I mean, the thing you mentioned, but the thing is that this is like a very cheap way of looking a good person. You want to show off how good you are. That's something I cannot really stand because you shouldn't show it off, right? You should be a good person because people know you are, regardless of what you're saying. Oh, look at me, and it's like a way of gaining attention, so to say.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I don't know if there's other thing that actually I was pretty fond of my religious COVID parallelism. You can find a lot. Oh, there's another parallelism that I could find, and it fits again the three. This is just to say that there is something in the human mind which is a structure that fits, either the political mindset, the scientist mindset, or the political mindset, religious mindset. As I said, there's another thing that people love to show off when they're religious, for example, is the love for suffering. Oh, I'm going through suffering, but I know it's for the greater good. Same thing here. It's the same thing. It's incredible. So, oh, I'm not doing anything, but it's for the greater good. It's like communism. Oh, we need to suffer. We need to work like 19 hours per day with no food, but it's for the greater good of society.
Yeah.
It's the same with nationalism, for that matters. Like when people tell you have to go and fight for your nation for the greater good of it, it's always this kind of this part of the human soul that gets fooled very easily by these ideals, and you want to believe in something greater, and you want to show it off. And sometimes, I mean, again, you can be a very good person and still believe in these things, but sometimes just the belief is again, it's at odds with reality. And you do things for the sake of doing things because you're associated with them with good values, but you don't really look at the rationale behind it. You don't really look at the fact, is it good for society as a whole? Like preventing people from interacting for so long? Is it good for society as a whole to have millions of people jobless? Keep them like preventing them from doing what they were trained for, preventing them from doing what they love. Aside from all from all the considerations about the effectiveness of these measures. So
That's a very good point. I had never considered that, but you're right. Like, people want to find meaning in suffering. Like,
yeah, exactly.
suffering
And
is
they
something you
want to
have
show
to
it off.
do.
They want to show it off. They will say, "Oh, we need to hang for to this. We need to fight." For example, I was reading about I was listening to a conference about North Korea from from a Spanish guy that's like the ambassador of North. Is like he became North Korean. He's a famous guy. He's a Spanish communist, moved to North Korea, and it's going back and forth all the time. But this guy at some point was so proud of North Koreans. Said, "Oh, during the 90s there was such a bad time there. People were starving." And he was talking about these people who were starving, but they were proud to starve and die for socialism. That's his exact words, right? And so, but isn't it supposed to be like the other way around? Like, isn't it the political system should improve your life? Like, shouldn't that be the ultimate goal? Like, improving people's life instead of killing people for an ideal? And again,
Yeah,
I'm citing communism. You could make the same argument for nationalism, for fascism, for any kind of extreme political ideology,
yeah,
which breeds on the same ground. It's exactly the same structure and the same ground. So
yeah. No, it's a very interesting. I had no idea about this guy. I mean, this is especially funny too, when considering that all these socialist arguments seem to be like, oh, it's going to get rid of all this inequality. It's like, yeah, everyone's equally poor. Like, it doesn't make everybody like equally middle class or equally whatever. But again, yeah, it's a belief system, and it's hard for people. I think it's hard for people first to accept that it's a belief system. Like, I realize that my religion is a belief system, and I don't expect anybody else to believe it. Um, some people don't hold the same opinion about their own belief system, but I think that all too often, when it comes to things that are non-religious, people want to believe that, well, I'm not even really believing in it. This is just a fact, or this is just the truth, and there's nothing about it or there's nothing that you can do about it to convince them to the contrary. It's very, very hard to talk with people like that.
yeah, absolutely. It's over. Like, again, going back to discussions I had on social media recently, at some point was like, oh well, then how do you think you're smarter than Angela Merkel or Mario Draghi or the European Commission, that they are all suggesting that this measure should be taking place? It's like, what the fuck? Like, for example, our prime minister is Catholic. Are you Catholic? Like, should you like believe in what he believes just because he's smarter than you on a number of issues? I mean, am I still allowed to? Again, and I'm doing some very kind of precise, quantitative, and scientific statement. I think it. I mean, I lost all hope on reasoning on about these issues with people, because again, even when you present some kind of scientific, it, I'm, I'm presenting some scientific evidence. It's not like some crackpot. It's not some kind of conspiracy. It's just scientific method used by scientists and shows some evidence which does not agree with your worldview. Would you like maybe just to read about this? I'm not a Jehovah's Witness, and I don't want to talk about
Yeah, here, take a copy of the Watchtower.
So
yeah, but that's also an interesting situation to be in, because there could be very, very smart people who will say stuff like what you said. Like, do you think you're smarter than Angela Merkel? It's like, smart people still make mistakes. So like, that's not even a very good argument, or even like an intelligent question, because like, if you ask anybody who we would view as smart, or in a position of expertise or leadership, they'll tell you they've been wrong about things. Like, and it had nothing to do with them being stupid. It's just that they found out that there was something that worked better or was more accurate. So yeah, I have definitely heard that before, and I can never wrap my head around that. Like, do you think you're smart? Like, okay, maybe I'm not smarter than Angela Merkel at running Germany. She's done that a long time. Like, maybe she knows what she's doing there, but like, that's irrelevant to the conversation at hand. So like,
yeah.
It's not advancing the discussion at all.
No. It's just it's this what's it called, like authority argument. It's like appeal to authority, which is
Exactly.
It's an argument, but that's what's happening all the time. I mean, again, like in many cases, it's reasonable to appeal to authority. For example, flying planes, okay, but it's not. There's tens of years of evidence
Yeah.
COVID is something completely new. Like you cannot claim there's a scientific consensus there um, that formed in 2 months. It never happened in the history of science. Why should it happen right now? In fact, there isn't. That just as you said, like the media is putting fuel on the fire by just listening to one side of the
Yeah.
argument, which is the one that happens to be the most extreme and the most catastrophist leaning, so to say.
Yeah, and the other thing too to keep in mind about the media is that like the whole business model is to get as many eyes on what they're doing
Yeah.
as possible. And if you don't have like a lot of readership, you don't have a lot of viewership, it affects
Sure.
the amount of money that you make. So, and I'm not saying that this proves that the media lies, but I will say for sure that at least in America, I think right now the trust in the media is like the lowest it's been in a very long time. I think people can sense that a lot of the stuff is just wildly speculative or is over the top. Like you mentioned, I believe it was Osterholm, who's Joe Biden's coronavirus czar. Back in like September, October, something like that, he said Florida is going to be like a house on fire
Yeah.
in a month, and it never happened. So, like, how many times does this have to happen? And he's not the only guy. This is just one example.
Yeah, out of
But how many
tens of
times?
examples,
How many times do things like this have to happen before people start to say, like, look, there's no question these guys are experts. They know what they're talking about, but they're getting their predictions wrong over and over again. Like, you eventually start to see a pattern. You don't need to be, have a PhD in some hard science to see that the pattern simply does not match what the predictions are. When it comes to some of the specifics, okay, it maybe will help a lot to have a certain amount of training, but stuff like that is like, I don't understand why people don't see it and then go, huh, well, maybe I should be a little more skeptical next time I hear that and see how it pans out. But by and large, people don't do that.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I mean, then we could also add a few words. You just talk about the media, the kind of incentive structures they face, but it's the same thing with politicians because now, on the one hand, like the populace is really scared, right? So you don't want to appear you're taking a great risk. Like a sizable chunk of the population believes that you should really shut down based on what they've been told so far. So you cannot really go back and say, look, maybe we overreacted. It's not on the menu, right? It's not something. There's people complaining that the government is not shutting down enough.
Yeah, these are the exact same people who are also like, oh, if I were in Nazi Germany, I would totally shelter Jews and not.
Yeah,
like,
sure. But
so
again, I don't like what's it called, reductio ad Hitlerum. Like,
no, I don't
not
either.
It's not. But you can see a pattern here, and it's not something completely new. It's to humankind. There's the fact that people. There's this psychology of masses that adhere to some weird ideology. It's like you can think we're still the same humans that went 1,000 years ago to the Crusades from Europe. Like everyone massively joined this crazy campaign, and you can find tens of such examples in history. And like the biology and the brain is basically the same. Like culture changed, but the instincts are still the same. And you should really watch out on these things. You should really watch out, especially when you're facing, like now we're facing this kind of restrictions without justifications, because there's no such thing, at least in Italy, but I'm pretty sure nowhere else. There's a detailed analysis on why you should shut down this kind of places at this time, or why you restrict my freedom of movement after this hour of the day, and how much does this impact? Why? And there's just the point is that politicians need to show that they're doing something. That's their main driver.
Exactly.
And the thing is that no matter what happens, if you predict a catastrophe and the catastrophe doesn't appear, then you say, oh, it's thanks to my suggestion. If it appears, then you can say, oh, look, I just predicted it.
Exactly.
On the other way around, it's a very bad strategy, because if you say, look, everything's going to be right, and then there's some issue, no matter the size of the issue, no matter whether the issue was going to show up anyways, you will be blamed for that. So like the safest bet is predicting a catastrophe.
Exactly. Yeah, and I hadn't thought about that, but it makes perfect sense. And that's
game theory. I mean, if you look, that's the payoff matrix. Like it's very easy. It's like this strategy you always get a positive payoff, no matter what happens. this other strategy might lead you to a very bad outcome, so you shouldn't take that.
Yeah, that's
And again,
interesting.
it's like there's a lot of you don't need to resort to conspiracy to explain this thing. There's the incentive structures everywhere um, that has this kind of this kind of reaction. It's the way there's some very weird coincidences, but
Yeah, no, 100%. And that I think it's our duty as citizens of whatever country we live in to keep these things in mind. And again, like expect from the media that they're going to be reporting intelligently and they're going to be reporting in a way that's not sensationalized, and then expecting from our politicians that they're not going to overstep their bounds. And I think one of the problems is, like you said, there's a large contingent in Italy, around Europe, in the United States, of people who want harder restrictions. And again, the thing I find very ironic is that, at least here in America, many of the people who are calling for more stringent restrictions are also the same people who cry crocodile tears for people who they feel are underpaid or whatever, or people who have jobs like as baristas or waiters or whatever. It's like these are the people who are getting hurt by this, or people who own small businesses. These are all the people who are being hurt, and you're asking to do something that hurts, that's going to ultimately hurt them more. Like there's a disconnect between the things that they support and that they like, and the ultimate consequences of them, and a simple like unwillingness to even acknowledge that this is going to cause potentially unnecessary hardship. It's, to me, I just really can't wrap my head around it. And it's so often, if you try to talk to somebody about it, you can just see that it's like going right over their head. They're not really interested in having an honest discussion. They just want to believe what they want to believe.
That's what when I see with when I'm discussing with this sort of people, then that's a perfectly legitimate argument that you're making. It's and that I made all the time too. So my answer is, why do you want to favor Amazon over the local shop owners?
Yeah.
Who are the people that are getting hurt the most from these policies? As for example, all those people that are working under the table, who are not usually like billionaires. They are like working in construction. They're working in any kind of restaurants usually, or entertainment industry, and they don't get any coverage whatsoever because they officially were not working even before that.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in Italy, so if you're working under the table, you're not doing like I'm an IT expert, like me myself. Like, okay, I'm fine. I'm doing fine with COVID, but what about this? Why do you want these poor people to become poorer? They're already doing shitty jobs. Not
exactly.
to have any, the only thing they can do is the.
By the way, this is completely apropos of nothing, but one of the commenters, Claudio Viola, just said, "I just noticed Mr. Salkin blinks upside down. Is he a reptilian?" Well, Claudio, the answer is, you caught me. I'm absolutely a reptilian. I didn't even realize that I was blinking upside down. Did not catch that at all. So thank you for pointing that out.
That's because reptilians are part of the Jewish conspiracy, right?
Exactly. Yeah. This giant Jewish conspiracy. I don't even know what the flavor du jour is of like what we Jews are up to. Somebody's left me out of the loop, but
אנחנו יודעים, אז אי אפשר להגיד עכשיו
בעברית אפשר להגיד.
בעברית כן, בעברית אפשר להגיד, אבל לא ביוטיוב.
כן, נכון מאוד. So anyhow, Claudio, thank you very much. I'm going to nominate you to be treated very well by the so-called international Jewish conspiracy, because you're very good at noticing these small things.
Anyway, I think we can wrap this up. And again, it was I liked this conversation. Thanks a lot for being such an asshole, Alex.
I was born that way, man. It's same thing with the reptilian. I just can't really help.
You're blinking the other way, sure.
Yeah, exactly. Well, as soon as this is off, I'm going to lick my eyes too, to further moisten them.
Anyway, so thanks a lot to everyone that joined the conversation. Thanks for the questions and the patience for keeping up with us almost 1 hour and a half. And I think that's it. We can say, see you in the future, people.
Sayonara.
The next episode of whatever podcast.
The whatever cast.
Whatever cast.